now we've practiced all these things. You went and you built the circuits, and you copied down the code, and you tried to look how they ran, maybe made a few changes. We come down here to the practice section, where I want you to try to take some of these circuits and hardware that we've worked on and write your own code from scratch. So not downloading my code or some code from the internet, but actually opening up a blank Arduino sketch and typing some stuff in. So first off, what we have here is I have a variation of 2 circuits on here. What we need to understand is it really doesn't matter what's going on this breadboard, because unless we're using it in the code, it's virtually useless. And so if the only thing that I actually code is this button, then this potentiometer and these 3 LEDs and these resistors and any of these other wires over here, they're not doing anything. They're just sitting there taking up space. Unless they're being told to do something, they're not doing anything. So one thing that I put on here is keep the 2 circuits on the breadboard. So one thing that would be very beneficial for you to do while you're doing these first 2 sections is to try to consolidate things. So here we build a button with 2 LEDs, and then down here I say we want a potentiometer and 3 LEDs. Well, we already have 2 of the LEDs on there. We also have an extra button. Nobody says we got to take everything apart, put the button somewhere else, and not include it. The button can still be sitting over here somewhere, or the button could be here and the LEDs could be spaced off, maybe 1 LED's here, 1 LED's here, 1 LED's here. It really doesn't matter. I'm trying to, in these pictures, just making it look somewhat organized and cleaned up a little bit. So the first thing I tell you to do is keep the 2 circuits on the board. And so that's what we have here. I have these 2 circuits. I have the first circuit, which was a button and 2 LEDs. It doesn't matter which 2. And this other one was a potentiometer and 3 LEDs. Well, I have a potentiometer and 3 LEDs as well. So I have both circuits here on the board. Then I'm going to give a little bit of information. I'm going to say make 2 if statement scopes, where one scope for the if the button is pressed. So one scope for if the button is pressed, and one scope for if it is not. So that's where I'm going to have to get into my code. Now I have a few things already in here. I made sure I had 3 LEDs, so I have 3 things in memory for those 3 LEDs. I have 1 button, so I have some information in memory about my button. I have a pin mode for each of these 3 LEDs. I have a pin mode for my button as an input. You'll notice that up here I didn't have anything for my potentiometer. That's because I don't have to do any setup for it, so I just opted to include that in my loop. You could leave this, the information in memory up here globally if you want. It works in the loop because I don't necessarily need it in both the setup and the loop. I also included some reads. I'm going to read the value of my potentiometer. I'm going to read the value of my button. So that's just my starting point. We really haven't done anything yet. For the most part, this is still a pretty blank sketch. So sometimes when I say blank sketch, it's not the fact that it is entirely blank, there's nothing there. Go ahead and open up the sketch and just add the things that you see on the board. If you're not sure what else to do, then just add some stuff. If you see LEDs, put those LEDs in memory. If you see a button, put it in memory. If you see a potentiometer, put it in memory. If all else fails and you're not sure where to put it all global for now. If I do have some things that are digital, such as my LEDs and my button, then go ahead and do pin modes for those. This is still just setting things up. I really haven't done anything. Anytime I have sensors, I like to go ahead and take my readings of those sensors as well. So this is just for the most part, a blank sketch that's just has some information about what's on my breadboard already. So remember, the next thing it said is make two if statement scopes. I'm going to start off just with some pseudocode here. It said two if statements. If something else. Now, what were those two if statements? Let's go back and look. One scope for if the button is pressed, and one scope for if it is not. If button pressed, if button not pressed. All right, so I have some information here already. I did this part. We're just chugging along. I kept the two circuits. I've now made two if statement scopes. Now I'm going to go in here. Within each of these scopes, have if statements. So what that's saying is, within this if statement, I want it to do some more stuff. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to go down here. In this case, I'm going to maybe indent a little bit. That way I know that the stuff that I put in here is inside of this if. So I said put some more if statements. If, comments, if. I'm going to do the same thing down here. I want to copy and paste. There we go. So I have some if statements. Within each of these scopes, have if statements that will control the LEDs differently depending on the potentiometer value. Have at least 3 potentiometer scopes per button scope. So these are going to be controlled with the potentiometer. These are controlled with the button. So have 3 potentiometer scopes, if statements, within each if button. So here's one if button. I now have to have a potentiometer scope. If value is less than 300, and yours could be anything else. I don't really care. It could be if the value is 0, do this. If it's 1, do this. If it's 2, do this. I really don't care. Just throw some numbers in here. If between 300 and 700, if above 700. And again, I'm just throwing these out here. You can do whatever you want to do. But remember, this is just pseudocode. And you can keep adding things on here. Once you get some pseudocode on here, we're going to have to figure out how to put this in. And the syntax here for this if statement would be if, and then put my condition in here. If but val equals, remember the double equals shows that we're checking something. So whatever's saved in memory of whatever the button did here when we took a reading is pressed. Now depending on how you set up the button, pressed might be 1, pressed might be 0. I'm going to put 0 in for mine right now. So if the button is pressed, I want to do something. This is a scope. We need to get in the mindset of anytime we say make an if statement or have a scope with something in it, that means that I'm going to need to have my open curly bracket and then at the end my closed curly bracket. So now we actually have some code. I have an if statement on if my button is pressed. Within that if statement, I have 3 things that could happen. You'll see that my pseudocode has turned into my comments. So now I have this one here. If value is less than 300. Well, that would be if. Now what is the value of my potentiometer? That's pot val. is less than 300. Now again, this is an if statement. That means that we need to open up a scope. And now I can do whatever I want in here. And I said I want to control LEDs, so I could do something like digital write LED 1, comma, high. And for sake of writing quickly, I'm just going to do some copying and pasting here really quick. All right, so if the button is pressed, it comes in here. If it's in here, if the potentiometer value is less than 300, it's going to come in here, which means LED 1 turns on, LED 2 is off, LED 3 is off. Make another if statement down here. If potentiometer value is greater than 300 and potentiometer value is less than 700, open up a scope, tell it to do something else. Beneath that, make another if statement, and then what we will have is we will have an if statement depending on the button. Within there, 3 if statements depending on the potentiometer. Then I need to make an if statement if the button's not pressed. If but val is not pressed, that is equaling 1. Open up a scope. Make some if statements. Make sure all scopes are closed. And we have developed this thing. So I know that sometimes you're going to get an assignment and you're going to work through some stuff. Then you're going to come down here and you're not going to sure where to get started. Start with the circuit. Make sure the circuit's built. Maybe put in some pseudocode to get things organized. Put in a few more details. Now, you're going to and doing what you want, and so sometimes I'll give you some ideas. An idea here is you can turn one light on per potentiometer scope. So in this case, we turned LED 1 on. Maybe within this one we could say turn everything off except LED 2, and in this one turn everything off except LED 3. I could have additional ones turn on each time I go in. I turn on LED 1 here. In this one, I have LED 1 and 2 on. And inside of here, I have LED 1, LED 2, and LED 3 on. I could have them blink. I could use the potentiometer to also control how long it blinks. Maybe use the value of the potentiometer as a delay. So there's a bunch of things you can do. Write things out, practice some things. If all else fails, I want you to build these 2 circuits, copy the codes down that I've written, read through these things, and play around with what is already there. Try to write something out, and if it doesn't work, email me, talk to Wayne, talk to Caitlin, talk to me in class, talk to me during office hours, before class, after class, whenever you can do it. I want you to get lots of practice. That's why this section is called the practice section. It's going to be a little bit harder. These sections above are for learning. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy. You're always going to find some hang-ups. But if you build the circuit correctly and you copy the code, you should be able to at least get this running. Read through the code, see what's happening, do the best you can to learn and understand.